The sterile white halls of the Xylos Galactic Medical Facility hummed with a quiet, efficient energy. Here, at the crossroads of 1,000 star systems, beings from every corner of the galaxy sought healing and solace. The facility was a testament to interspecies cooperation, a place where advanced technology and diverse medical expertise converged to combat disease and injury. Within its walls, you could find a KRYL surgeon delicately repairing a fractured quantum core, a Vespid bioengineer cultivating regenerative tissue grafts, or a Gromflaxian empath soothing the psychic trauma of a war veteran. This was no backwater clinic cobbled together from salvage parts. Xylos boasted state-of-the-art diagnostic scanners that could unravel the most complex physiologies, automated surgical suites capable of performing procedures at a molecular level, and xenobiological labs brimming with exotic compounds harvested from across the known universe. The facility prided itself on its ability to handle any medical emergency, regardless of the patient's origin or condition. Yet, despite its advanced capabilities, Xylos was, in a way, unprepared. Its databases, while extensive, were filled with the common ailments and injuries of civilized species. The vast majority of patients came from planets with stable atmospheres, predictable climates, and relatively fragile ecosystems. Deathworlders, on the other hand, were another matter entirely. These planets, characterized by extreme gravity, lethal radiation, and a constant struggle for survival, bred life forms that were almost impossibly resilient. Their bodies were forged in the crucible of constant adversity, evolving defenses that defied conventional medical understanding. Xylos rarely saw Deathworlders, and when they did, the results were often unpredictable. The staff, accustomed to the delicate intricacies of more fragile species, sometimes found themselves at a loss when confronted with the brutal efficiency of Deathworlder. Biology. This was precisely the situation about to unfold in Operating Theater Gamma 7. The emergency klaxons blared, signaling the arrival of a new patient. The emergency klaxons echoed through the corridors, their shrill cries cutting through the usual hum of the Xylos facility. A medical transport, designated Echo 9, had just docked, its arrival flagged as a code red. Immediate life-threatening injuries. The destination, Operating Theater Gamma 7. Inside Gamma 7, the surgical team was already assembling, their movements precise and practiced. At Dr. Eris, a KRYL surgeon known for her steady hands and encyclopedic knowledge of alien anatomy, took her position at the head of the operating table. Beside her stood Xyler, a Vespid bioengineer, his multiple eyes already scanning the incoming patient data. A low thrum announced the opening of the theater doors, and the transport sledge shot into the room, its emergency lights flashing ominously. The scene was chaotic. Two hulking Gromflaxian paramedics struggled to restrain the patient, a figure barely visible beneath a tangle of restraints and medical tubing. The air crackled with the scent of ozone and something else, something primal and metallic. The paramedics wrestled the patient onto the operating table. The team got their first clear look at it. Was a Deathworlder, undoubtedly. Humanoid in form, but radiating an aura of raw power that made the air in the room seem to vibrate. Scars crisscrossed their heavily muscled limbs, testament to battles fought and won. Their breathing was ragged, shallow gasps that strained against the restraints. A jagged piece of shrapnel protruded from their abdomen, staining their armor crimson. "Vitals are critical," Xyler announced, his voice tight with urgency. "Massive internal bleeding, multiple fractures, neural activity erratic." Eris nodded grimly. "Stabilize them. Prep for immediate surgery." Xyler, "Run a full diagnostic scan. I want to know everything we're dealing with." Despite the gravity of the situation, a sense of professional calm settled over the team. They had faced countless emergencies before, each one a unique puzzle to be solved. They were the best of the best, and they were confident that they could save this Deathworlder's life, just like they had saved so many others. Little did they know, the true challenge had only just begun. The Deathworlder's physiology was about to throw them a curveball they could never have anticipated. Xyler's multiple eyes, darted across the holographic display, processing the torrent of data flooding in from the diagnostic scanners. Heart rate elevated but stable, blood pressure surprisingly high, even for a Deathworlder. Neural activity is spiking intermittently, indicating significant pain. He paused, his antennae twitching. Skeletal structure is remarkably dense. Rib cage is reinforced. I'm detecting trace amounts of an unknown metallic compound interwoven with the bone matrix. Dr. Eris, meanwhile, was overseeing the insertion of intravenous lines and the administration of broad-spectrum antibiotics. "What about internal organ damage?" she asked, her voice calm and focused. "Severe lacerations to the spleen and liver," Zyler replied. "The shrapnel has also punctured a major artery. Blood loss is significant." He highlighted the affected areas on the holographic display, showcasing the extent of the damage. "I'm detecting elevated levels of adrenaline and something else, a complex cocktail of hormones I can't quite identify, but it's like their body is flooding itself with survival chemicals." Eris considered the data. Typical Deathworlder response. Their bodies are designed to withstand extreme trauma. But the blood loss is our primary concern, that we need to get them stabilized before we can even think about removing the shrapnel. She turned to the anesthesiologist, a gentle Gromflaxian named Grok. "Grok, administer a general anesthetic. Be careful. Their tolerance might be higher than we expect." Grok nodded, his large, soulful eyes filled with concern. He carefully adjusted the dosage, monitoring the Deathworlder's vital signs. Slowly, the patient's struggling subsided, their breathing becoming more regular. The surgical team breathed a collective sigh of relief. The initial phase of stabilization was complete. Now came the real challenge: repairing the damage and pulling this Deathworlder back from the brink. They prepped their instruments, the familiar click and whir of the surgical tools, a comforting sound in the tense atmosphere. Eris picked up her scalpel, its energy blade humming softly. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "Let's get to work." The first incision was about to be made, and with it, the discovery that would shatter their confidence and plunge them into uncharted medical territory. The energy scalpel hummed, a thin beam of concentrated energy slicing through the Deathworlder's flesh. Eris made a precise incision. Following the preoperative scans that a small amount of blood welled up, as expected. Eris reached for a standard suction device to clear the area. But then, something impossible happened. Before the suction device could even make contact, the blood began to congeal. Not a slow, gradual thickening, but an instantaneous transformation. The liquid blood turned into a viscous, gelatinous mass, sealing the incision as if a biological sealant had been applied. Eris stared, her multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" Zyler, monitoring the surgical field through his optical sensors, gasped. "I'm detecting a hyper-accelerated clotting factor. It's off the charts. The blood is solidifying almost instantly on contact with the air." Eris tried the suction device anyway, but it was useless. The congealed blood formed a stubborn plug, resisting all attempts to remove it. She switched to a microdissector, attempting to carefully cut through the clot, but as soon as she made another incision, the same thing happened again. More blood welled up and instantly solidified. Panic began to creep into the operating theater. Grok, the anesthesiologist, frantically checked the Deathworlder's vital signs. Heart rate is spiking, blood pressure is dropping. They're losing blood flow to the extremities. Eris tried another technique, flooding the area with a powerful anticoagulant. But instead of thinning the blood, it seemed to accelerate the clotting process even further. The blood turned into a hard, rubbery substance, completely blocking the incision. "It's not working. The anticoagulant is making it worse," she exclaimed, her voice rising in desperation. The surgical team was frozen, their confidence shattered. They had never encountered anything like this before. It was as if the Deathworlder's body was actively fighting against their attempts to save it, its blood turning into a weapon against them. The impossible had happened, and they were completely unprepared. The clock was ticking, and the Deathworlder's life was slipping away with every passing second. The sterile operating theater, moments before a beacon of calm professionalism, was now a scene of escalating chaos. Zyler frantically adjusted the diagnostic scanners, trying to make sense of the impossible readings. "I'm running every coagulation test in the database. Nothing matches. It's like their blood is designed to instantly seal any wound, regardless of the damage." Eris, her usually steady hands trembling slightly, tried a different approach. Perhaps with a localized reaction, a defense mechanism triggered by the incision. She instructed a surgical assistant to prepare a localized anesthetic with a paralytic agent, hoping to temporarily disable the clotting response in the immediate area. But even the paralytic agent failed to make a difference. The blood continued to clot, forming a grotesque, rubbery mass that obscured the surgical field. The Deathworlder's vital signs continued to deteriorate. Grok, his Gromflaxian face etched with worry, reported, "Blood pressure critical. Oxygen levels plummeting. We're losing them." Eris felt a cold dread creep into her heart. She had never faced a situation where her medical knowledge was so utterly useless. Every attempt to intervene only seemed to make things worse. The Deathworlder's body was reacting in a way that defied all logic, all understanding. "Try a protein disruptor," Zyler shouted, his voice strained. "Maybe we can break down the clotting factors at a molecular level." He hastily prepared a solution and handed it to Eris. She injected it directly into the clot, holding her breath as she waited for a response. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the clot began to expand, puffing up like a grotesque balloon, and a putrid odor filled the air. "What's happening?" Eris gasped. "It's destabilizing the cellular structure," Zyler exclaimed. "But it's also releasing toxins. The patient's system is going into shock." The Deathworlder's body convulsed violently. Their heart rate flatlined. The monitors beeped a deafening, continuous tone. Eris stared in horror at the unfolding disaster. She had made it worse. Much, much worse. The deafening flatline echoed through the operating theater, a stark and brutal pronouncement of failure. Eris stood frozen, her multifaceted eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The Deathworlder lay motionless on the table, their powerful frame now still and lifeless. Code Blue, Zyler shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Start resuscitation, now." He and Grok immediately began chest compressions, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. A surgical assistant grabbed a defibrillator, charging it with a surge of energy. Eris, however, remained paralyzed, unable to shake off the weight of her failure. She had killed them. Her attempts to help had only accelerated their demise. The thought was a crushing weight on her conscience. Zyler placed the defibrillator paddles on the Deathworlder's chest and delivered a powerful shock. The body convulsed violently, but the flat line persisted. "Again," Zyler yelled. Another shock, still nothing. "It's no use," Grok cried, his voice thick with despair. "Their system is shutting down. We can't bring them back." He slumped back, his large, soulful eyes filled with tears. Eris finally snapped out of her stupor. She knew, deep down, that Grok was right. The Deathworlder was gone, but she couldn't give up. Not yet. "Epinephrine, a massive dose, directly into the heart," she ordered, her voice regaining a semblance of authority. A surgical assistant quickly prepared the injection and handed it to Eris. With a steady hand, she plunged the needle into the Deathworlder's chest, injecting the adrenaline directly into their heart muscle. They waited, holding their breath, for any sign of life. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, a faint flicker appeared on the heart monitor, a weak, erratic pulse. "They're back," Zyler exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. "We got them back." But the relief was short-lived. The weak pulse quickly faded, replaced once again by the dreaded flatline. The Deathworlder was gone again. Eris stared at the monitor, her mind racing. She had one last idea, a desperate gamble. "Prepare a full-body blood transfusion," she ordered. replace their entire circulatory system with fresh, clean blood. It was a long shot, a procedure fraught with risk, but at this point they had nothing to lose. The surgical team sprang into action, their movements now driven by a desperate hope, a desperate need to undo the damage that had been done. The full-body blood transfusion was a race against time. Surgical assistants worked with feverish intensity, connecting a complex network of tubes and pumps to the Deathworlder's circulatory system. They began to drain the rapidly clotting blood, replacing it with a universal donor type synthesized in the facility's xenobiological labs. Eris monitored the process with a grim expression. The new blood flowed smoothly, temporarily clearing the surgical field, but as soon as it came into contact with the damaged tissues, the clotting began again. Not as rapidly as before, but noticeably faster than normal. "It's still happening," Xyler exclaimed, his voice tight with frustration. "The new blood is clotting too, but why?" Eris realized the horrifying truth. The clotting wasn't just a property of the Deathworlder's blood itself. That it was a systemic response triggered by something within their body, perhaps a chemical signal or a biological mechanism they couldn't detect. "We need to find the source of the clotting response," she declared. "Xyler, run a full-spectrum scan. Look for any unusual biochemical markers, any anomalous energy signatures, anything that could be triggering this." Xyler nodded, his multiple eyes darting across the holographic display. He ran a series of complex scans, analyzing the Deathworlder's tissues at a molecular level. The data poured in, a dizzying torrent of information. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The transfusion continued, but the clotting persisted, slowly but surely choking the Deathworlder's circulatory system. Their vital signs remained dangerously low. Suddenly, Xyler gasped. "I've got something," he exclaimed. "A localized energy signature in the adrenal glands. It's emitting a powerful hormonal signal, a modified form of adrenaline I've never seen before. It's like their body is pumping out a supercharged clotting agent." Eris's eyes widened. The adrenal glands, of course. They're flooding their system with a survival response. But how do we stop it? She considered the options, her mind racing. They could try to surgically remove the adrenal glands, but the procedure was incredibly risky and the Deathworlder was already on the brink of death. They could try to block the hormonal signal, but they didn't have an antidote, and they didn't have time to synthesize one. "We're out of options," Grok said, his voice filled with despair. "We've tried everything, but it's no use." Eris looked at the Deathworlder, their face pale and lifeless. She knew that Grok was right. They were losing them, but she couldn't give up. Not yet. There had to be something, anything, they could try. Just as despair threatened to consume the operating theater, a voice crackled over the comm system. "Eris, this is Medic Gemlar from Observation Deck 4. I've been monitoring your situation. Oh, you have a moment?" Eris hesitated. Every second counted, and she didn't have time for idle conversation. But Gemlar was a senior medic, known for her extensive experience and unorthodox thinking. "Put her through," Eris said, her voice weary. Gemlar's image flickered onto a small display screen. She was an older KRYLL, her multifaceted eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. "Eris, I overheard your discussion about the adrenal glands. Are you familiar with the theoretical paper by Dr. Forlag on extreme adaptation in Deathworld species?" Eris frowned. "Forlag? I've heard of him. His theories are unconventional, to say the least. He argues that Deathworld organisms can develop biological mechanisms that defy our current understanding of physiology." "Precisely," Gemlar said. Forlag theorized that some Deathworld species might evolve hyper-accelerated clotting factors as a survival mechanism, that a way to instantly seal wounds and prevent blood loss in a hostile environment. Eris's eyes widened. "But that's just a theory. There's no empirical evidence to support it." "Perhaps," Gemlar said calmly. "But consider your current situation. Everything you've tried has failed. Perhaps it's time to consider a different perspective." Forlag suggested that these hyperclotting factors might be triggered by a specific enzyme, one that is unique to these species. "And if we could identify that enzyme?" Eris asked, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Then you might be able to synthesize an inhibitor, Jinlar said, a compound that could block the enzyme and prevent the clotting response. Eris hesitated that IT was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on a theoretical paper. But they were out of options. "Can you access Forlag's paper?" she asked. "I already have," Jinlar replied. "I'm transmitting the relevant data now. Good luck." "Eris, I have a feeling you're going to need it." The transmission ended, and Eris turned to Xyler, her voice filled with renewed determination. "Xyler, access the data from Jinlar. Let's see if we can find this enzyme." Xyler's multiple eyes blurred as he sifted through the data Jinlar had transmitted. The Forlag's paper was dense, filled with complex equations and arcane terminology. But as he delved deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Forlag had identified a specific enzyme, which he termed thromboaccelerase, present in several Deathworld species known for their extreme resilience. "I found it," Xyler exclaimed. Thromboaccelerase. Forlag theorizes that it acts as a catalyst, triggering a cascade of reactions that lead to near-instantaneous blood clotting. He highlighted the relevant section of the paper, displaying a complex molecular diagram. "It's a highly complex protein structure, unlike anything I've ever seen before." Eris studied the diagram, her mind racing. "Can we synthesize an inhibitor?" Xyler shook his head. "It would take weeks, maybe months. That we don't have that kind of time." But Forlag mentions a potential disruptor, a rare compound found on a remote jungle planet in the Gamma Serpentis system. He calls it Serpentis X. Eris frowned. "Serpentis X? I've never heard of IT.is it available in the facilities database." Xyler ran a search. "Negative, there's no record of it. It's too obscure, too rare." "Then we're back to square one," Grok said, his voice filled with despair. "We can't synthesize an inhibitor, and we can't get our hands on this Serpentis X. We've exhausted all our options." Eris refused to give up. She stared at the molecular diagram of thromboaccelerase, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability. "What if we could modify an existing anticoagulant?" she asked. "Could we tweak its molecular structure to make it target thromboaccelerase specifically?" Xyler considered the idea. "It's possible, but it would be incredibly risky. That we don't know how the modified anticoagulant would interact with the Deathworlder system. That IT could have unforeseen side effects." "We don't have a choice," Eris said firmly. "It's our only chance. Xyler, start working on a modified anticoagulant. Target thromboaccelerase specifically, but be prepared for unexpected reactions." Xyler nodded, his multiple eyes filled with a mixture of determination and apprehension. He began to manipulate the molecular structure of a standard anticoagulant, carefully adding and removing atoms, trying to create a compound that would bind to thromboaccelerase and block its activity. The clock was ticking, and the Deathworlder's life hung in the balance. Xyler worked with frantic speed, his multiple eyes darting across the holographic display as he manipulated the molecular structure of the anticoagulant. Eris, meanwhile, conferred with Grok, devising a plan to mitigate the risks associated with the experimental treatment. The modified anticoagulant could have unpredictable side effects, Eris said. "We need to be prepared for anything. Grok, I want you to monitor the Deathworlder's vital signs with extreme vigilance. Look for any signs of organ failure, allergic reactions, or neurological damage." Grok nodded, his Gromflaxian face etched with concern. "I'll be ready," he said. Eris also realized that the surgical environment itself might be contributing to the clotting response. The air in the operating theater, while sterile, was still stimulating the thromboaccelerase. "We need to create a modified atmosphere," she declared, "one that minimizes the enzyme's activity." She instructed the surgical assistants to flood the operating theater with a dense, inert gas, creating a hypoxic environment. That IT was a risky move, as it would deprive the Deathworlder of oxygen, but Eris believed it was necessary to slow down the clotting process. Finally, Xyler announced that he had completed the modified anticoagulant. "I've designated it antithromboaccelerase X1, he said, his voice strained. "But I have to warn you, Eris, its molecular structure is unstable. IT could degrade rapidly, or it could have unexpected interactions with the Deathworlder's tissues. Eris took a deep breath. "It's the best we've got," she said. "Prepare to administer antithromboaccelerase X1. But be ready to counteract any adverse reactions." She looked at the surgical team, her eyes filled with determination. "We're going into uncharted territory. We don't know what's going to happen, but we have to try, for the Deathworlder and for ourselves." The surgical team prepared for the experimental procedure. The air in the operating theater was thick with inert gas, creating a strange, dreamlike atmosphere. The monitors beeped softly, a constant reminder of the Deathworlder's precarious condition. Eris picked up her scalpel, its energy blade humming softly. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do this." The fate of the Deathworlder, and perhaps the future of interspecies medicine, hung in the balance. Eris made a careful incision, the energy scalpel slicing through the Deathworlder's flesh in the hypoxic atmosphere. The blood welled up slowly, sluggishly, a stark contrast to the instantaneous clotting they had witnessed before. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Administer antithromboaccelerase X1, Eris ordered. Xyler carefully injected the modified anticoagulant into the Deathworlder's bloodstream. The team watched with bated breath, waiting for a reaction. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, the Deathworlder's heart rate began to fluctuate wildly. "Heart rate spiking," Grok announced, his voice tight with concern. "Blood pressure dropping. They're going into cardiac arrest." Eris acted quickly. "Epinephrine, and prepare for defibrillation." She knew that the antithromboaccelerase X1 was having a toxic effect on the Deathworlder's heart. They had to stabilize them before it was too late. The surgical assistants administered the epinephrine and charged the defibrillator. Eris placed the paddles on the Deathworlder's chest and delivered a powerful shock. The body convulsed violently, and the heart monitor flickered erratically. "We've stabilized them," Grok said, his voice filled with relief. "But their heart is still weak, though we need to be careful." Eris resumed the surgery, carefully removing the shrapnel from the Deathworlder's abdomen. The bleeding was minimal, thanks to the hypoxic atmosphere and the antithromboaccelerase X1, but the Deathworlder's body continued to react in unpredictable ways. Their respiratory system began to shut down, forcing the team to manually ventilate them. Their body temperature fluctuated wildly, requiring constant adjustments to the operating theater's climate control system. IT was a constant battle, a delicate dance between life and death. "I'm detecting a buildup of toxins in their liver," Xyler announced. "The antithromboaccelerase X1 is damaging their organs that we need to flush their system with a detoxifying agent." Eris nodded, her face grim. "Prepare the detoxifying agent. But be careful that IT could have its own side effects." She knew that they were walking a tightrope, balancing the need to save the Deathworlder's life with the risk of causing further damage. Hours passed, filled with tense moments, and IT was a technique that used microscopic nanobots to weave a delicate mesh around the damaged blood vessels, reinforcing them without causing further trauma. IT was time-consuming and required incredible precision, but it was their only hope. Eris activated the nanobot injectors, carefully guiding them through the surgical field. The microscopic robots began to weave their delicate mesh around the ruptured blood vessels, slowly but surely repairing the damage. IT was painstaking work, requiring unwavering focus and a steady hand. Hours passed, filled with tense silence and the soft hum of the nanobot injectors. The Deathworlder's vital signs remained precarious, but stable. The massive clot remained in place, a temporary dam against the deadly tide of blood loss. Finally, Eris finished repairing the last of the damaged blood vessels. "The vascular system is stabilized," she announced, her voice weary but triumphant. "We can now remove the clot." The surgical assistants carefully dissolved the massive clot, clearing the surgical field. The repaired blood vessels held firm, no longer leaking blood. The Deathworlder's blood pressure began to rise, their heart rate stabilizing. "We did it," Grok said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." Eris allowed herself a small smile. They had faced the impossible, and they had emerged victorious. But the battle was far from over. The Deathworlder's body was still severely damaged, their organs weakened by the experimental treatments. They still had a long road to recovery ahead of them. But for now, they'd saved their life, and that was enough. Eris looked at the Deathworlder, their face pale but peaceful. She knew that they had pushed them to the brink of death and back again. She wondered, what kind of being could withstand such extreme trauma, such relentless adversity? She had a newfound respect for Deathworlders, for their incredible resilience and their unwavering will to survive. They were a force of nature, a testament to the power of life to adapt and endure, and she was grateful to have had the opportunity to witness their strength, to have played a part in their survival. The surgical team stood in the operating theater, exhausted but exhilarated. The monitors beeped steadily, indicating that the Deathworlder's vital signs were stable. The crisis had passed, but the victory came at a cost. The Deathworlder's body had been pushed to its absolute limits. Their organs were weakened, their immune system compromised. They would require extensive rehabilitation and constant monitoring to fully recover. And the surgical team was equally battered. Eris felt drained, both physically and emotionally. She had never faced such a challenging case, such a relentless battle against the odds. The experience had shaken her confidence, forcing her to confront the limits of her knowledge and abilities. Xyler, his multiple eyes bloodshot and weary, slumped against a console. He had pushed himself to the brink of exhaustion, working tirelessly to synthesize the modified anticoagulant and monitor the Deathworlder's complex physiology. He knew that the antithromboaccelerase X1 had saved their life, but had also caused significant damage. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had gotten lucky, that they had narrowly avoided a catastrophic failure. Grok, his Gromflaxian face etched with worry, gently stroked the Deathworlder's arm. He had felt their pain, their fear, their desperate will to survive, that he knew that they had been through hell, and he hoped that they would be able to find peace and healing. The surgical assistants began to clean the operating theater, their movements slow and deliberate. The sterile white walls were now stained with blood and chemicals, a testament to the intense struggle that had taken place within those walls. The air still hung heavy with the scent of inert gas and the lingering memory of death. Eris looked at the Deathworlder, their face pale but peaceful. She knew that they had saved their life, but she also knew that they had changed them forever. They had shown them the true meaning of resilience, the incredible power of life to endure, and she was grateful for the lesson, even though it had come at such a high price. Later, in the quiet solitude of her office, Eris replayed the events of the surgery in her mind. The impossible clotting, the desperate improvisations, the near-fatal complications. It was a blur of frantic activity and impossible decisions. She thought about the Deathworlder, their body a battleground of extreme adaptations and experimental treatments. She had never encountered such a resilient organism, such a fierce will to survive. That IT was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. She accessed the facility's database, searching for more information on Deathworld biology. She read about planets with crushing gravity, lethal radiation, and ecosystems teeming with predators. She learned about species that had evolved to withstand extreme temperatures, corrosive atmospheres, and deadly toxins. She realized that her understanding of life was limited, shaped by the relatively benign environments of the civilized worlds. She had underestimated the power of evolution to create organisms that defied her conventional medical knowledge. She thought about Dr. Forlag, the unorthodox scientist who had theorized about the hyperaccelerated clotting factors. She had initially dismissed his theories as fanciful speculation, but now she saw them in a new light. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps Deathworld species possessed biological mechanisms that were beyond her comprehension. She knew that she had to expand her knowledge, to learn more about the extreme adaptations of Deathworld organisms. She had to be prepared for the next time she encountered a patient from such a planet. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. She also realized that medicine was not just about knowledge and technology, that IT was about compassion, about empathy, about the willingness to push oneself to the limit to save a life. She had seen that in the faces of her surgical team, in their unwavering determination to overcome the impossible. She knew that she would never forget the Deathworlder, their name unknown, their story untold. They had taught her a valuable lesson, a lesson about the resilience of life, the limits of knowledge, and the power of compassion. Days later, Eris visited the Deathworlder in the intensive care unit. They were still weak, their body ravaged by the surgery and the experimental treatments. But they were alive. They lay in a sterile bed, hooked up to a multitude of monitors and life support systems. Their eyes were closed, their breathing shallow but steady. Eris approached the bedside, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. As she stood there, the Deathworlder's eyes slowly opened. They were a deep, intense blue, filled with a quiet strength and a stoic acceptance of their situation. They looked at Eris, their gaze unwavering. Eris bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect. "I am Dr. Eris," she said, her voice soft. "I was the lead surgeon on your case." The Deathworlder nodded slowly, acknowledging her presence. They didn't speak, but their eyes conveyed a sense of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the ordeal they had both endured. Eris explained, in simple terms, what had happened during the surgery. She told them about the impossible clotting, the experimental treatments, the near-fatal complications. She didn't sugarcoat the truth, but she also emphasized the team's unwavering commitment to saving their life. The Deathworlder listened, patiently, their expression unchanging. When Eris had finished, they simply nodded again, their eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. Eris was struck by their stoicism, their lack of complaint or self-pity. They had been through hell, and yet they showed no sign of bitterness or resentment. They seemed to accept their fate with a quiet dignity, a strength that defied explanation. Eris reached out a hand, hesitating for a moment before gently touching the Deathworlder's arm. Their skin was warm, surprisingly soft despite their hardened exterior. She felt a faint tremor, a subtle vibration of strength beneath the surface. The Deathworlder looked at her hand, then back at her eyes. For a brief moment, their gaze intensified, as if they were seeing something beyond her physical form, something deeper, more profound. Eris felt a sudden surge of emotion, a wave of empathy that washed over her. She realized that they had both faced death, had both stared into the abyss and emerged on the other side. They were connected by this shared experience, by this profound understanding of the fragility and the preciousness of life. She didn't know their name, their story, their purpose, but she knew that they were a fellow being, a fellow traveler on this long and arduous journey through the universe. And she knew that their life was valuable, that it was worth fighting for, worth saving, no matter the cost. The Deathworlder slowly raised their hand, mirroring Eris's gesture. Their fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down her spine. It was a simple gesture, a silent acknowledgement of their shared humanity, their shared vulnerability. That in that moment, Eris felt a profound sense of connection, a deep understanding that transcended species, culture, and language. They were both living beings, struggling to survive in a vast and indifferent universe. And they were both grateful for the gift of life, for the opportunity to experience the wonder and the beauty of existence. The moment passed, as fleeting as a shooting star. The Deathworlder closed their eyes, their breathing becoming more regular. They had drifted back into sleep, leaving Eris alone with her thoughts. She withdrew her hand. She left the intensive care unit, her mind filled with lingering questions and a newfound sense of humility. She knew that the experience had changed her, had broadened her perspective on medicine and the diversity of life in the galaxy. She sought out Xyler and Grok, finding them in the facility's cafeteria, sipping nutrient paste and staring blankly into space. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm. They looked up, their faces still etched with fatigue. "About what?" Xyler asked wearily. "About Deathworlders," Eris said. "About their unique physiology, their extreme adaptations, and the challenges they pose to our medical practices." She proposed the creation of a specialized training program for treating Deathworld patients, a program that would incorporate the latest research on extreme biology and the lessons they had learned from their recent experience. We also need to invest in specialized equipment, she continued. Diagnostic scanners that can accurately analyze Deathworld physiologies, surgical tools that can withstand their incredible resilience, and pharmaceuticals that can effectively counteract their unique defense mechanisms. Zyler and Grok nodded in agreement. They had both seen firsthand the limitations of their current knowledge and resources. They knew that they needed to be better prepared for the next time they encountered a Deathworld patient. Eris also contacted Metagenlar, thanking her for her invaluable insights and her unwavering support. She proposed a collaboration, a joint effort to